Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SourceForge Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Beau Hamilton, Senior Editor and Multimedia Producer here at SourceForge, the world's most visited software comparison site where B2B software buyers compare and find business software solutions. Today, we're talking with Greg Walls, VP of Revenue for Paccurate, a parcel packing intelligence platform that helps shippers make better packaging decisions to ultimately reduce costs and environmental impact. They're really all about looking for ways to improve supply chain efficiency and sustainability using things like advanced algorithms and artificial intelligence, which is, as you guys know, a big buzzword in the tech industry right now. So to talk more about this endeavor, let me introduce Greg Walls. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, and I appreciate you having me on today.
Happy to have you here. Now, I want to start, would you be able to give us an overview of Paccurate and sort of unpack everything that it offers?
Yeah, unpack everything. Good. I like that. That was great lead off. Yeah, Bo, certainly. So Paccurate is a small early stage startup company, and we create what's known as cartonization software. We actually have a cartonization platform. Now, what the hell is cartonization? Well, it's kind of the systemic process of basically trying to fit a certain amount of items into the smallest or lowest cost box to ship them in. Said a little bit differently, most of our listeners out there have probably had this experience, but if you've ever gotten a corrugated box in the mail from an Amazon or a Target or some e-commerce provider, and it's a tiny little item rattling around in a big old box, and you look at it, you say, this seems really wasteful and expensive. Well, you'd be right, and we aim to try and solve that problem. We have a couple different tools to do it, but at the heart of our company, that's really what we're trying to do is kind of reduce a lot of that shipping cost when air is shipped, is what it's called in our industry, as well as reduce a lot of that waste that happens when you have a giant cardboard box show up on your front door that's barely filled.
Okay, yeah, I've definitely experienced that. Thanks for breaking down cartonization, because there's always these new terms and acronyms with different businesses, and so I appreciate listeners are going to appreciate that for sure. And I love how you mentioned like everyone's received those big cardboard box deliveries with little items rattling around. I think that's something that's always bothered me, and I think it just screams inefficiency, right?
Yeah, we actually have a Slack channel internally called the Hall of Sadness that we have a lot of friends and family and people that send us pictures of orders they get that are poorly packaged or seem very wasteful, and so we feature them in there. To be fair, we also have a Hall of Radness, which features very well packed boxes because there are a lot of companies out there doing a lot of good work around that, so we don't want to minimize them either, but yeah, it's a really interesting problem. It's one people feel very viscerally when they receive that package, and certainly for the brands out there, they don't want that feeling associated of that negative, like, oh, how wasteful is this? As the people receive their package, that's a bad collision of feelings that brands have when people receive their orders.
100%. Yeah, we want to channel more rad energy and not sad energy. Now, before we dive into some of the technology at play here, I want to know a little bit more about the company. What's the story behind Paccurate's creation, and what's changed from when it was first started to where it's at today?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty relevant story to maybe some of our listeners out there. But our two co-founders, James and Pat, were working in an adjacent industry to this sort of problem, which is known as the transportation management space. And through it, they realized after getting exposed, they worked in sort of a consulting capacity, exposed to a lot of these different types of systems, that this sort of part of most of these systems, this cartonization algorithm, was either non-existent, which meant relying on humans to make those packing decisions, which always ends up in error, or just a very crude, basic algorithm running in the background that sort of resulted in, again, some of these larger than expected boxes being shipped. This is air being shipped. And so Pat and James have a background in a lot of different sort of industries and some sort of fields of study, but Pat in particular, who's our CTO, very math-oriented person, and he basically spent about 4 to 5 years developing a fairly advanced 3D cubing algorithm that essentially can provide a much better and smarter pack in a way that no one has really done before. And cartonization is not necessarily a new idea. There are ways to do it today. But the way we do it and the sort of benefit we can bring primarily through things like utilizing cloud computing, it's a math problem at the heart of it, right? And so being able to throw more processing power at a fitting problem actually results in usually a better fit. And kind of through that repeated use of it and times your 3 million orders per year, that's how they arrived at the idea that there was some real value to this type of technology. So they began the company. They had originally started actually as sort of call it a sign up online, self-serve API type program. It's sort of a side hustle for them, to use the common term. During the pandemic, when sort of e-commerce started to really, really get into focus and this problem became magnified for a lot of people, they started getting a lot of interest from big enterprise players, people like Crate and Barrel and some other sort of large retailers that you can kind of see on our website under the case study section. But that was the point that they realized, hey, this could be its own company. Maybe this is a subset of a larger problem. Pat, our CTO, likes to use an analogy, which is we're the wardrobe in Narnia. We're inside the house, we're a part of the house, but it turns out when you open that door, there's a really big world and frankly, a lot of waste to be saved and a lot of dollars to be saved. So from there, it kind of turned into what be considered a more normal startup path. And here we are.
Huh. Yeah, I love that Narnia analogy there, and just like the general kind of foundation where you notice there's a poor cartonization logic. You realized that you could do better, and so they decided to take action on the issue. I think that's the great. You got to love that about kind of the business market and environment we have here. I'm curious, what did you mention you were started in around the COVID pandemic era? 2020.
Even before then, so the company itself is about, I think at this point, almost 8 or 9 years old. And you actually see that kind of reflected in our product maturity. But it wasn't until that 2021, 2022 timeframe that Pat and James really began as a real sort of funded company. So prior to that, it was just the two of them working on this kind of as their night job, so to speak. So really in commercial terms, we're probably considered to be, 3, 4 years old at this point. But one of the nice things for me on the go-to-market side and kind of helping serve clients is because they've been working on the technology for so long, the API is actually quite robust. I think we had a total of 1 hour of downtime last year, which for listeners, we're somewhere around 4 nines of uptime. Yeah, and that has certainly helped a lot with, we engage a lot of enterprises and they are sort of rightly skeptical sometimes of a small startup being part of a mission critical system. But a lot of the hard work that Pat and James did in the years preceding our real start, so to speak, has actually allowed us to sort of allay those fears and really have a successful breakout into the enterprise space to begin with. Just not how a lot of startups start or enter the market.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Could you elaborate on some of the technology that's at play here and how it addresses some of the gaps in shipping and the logistics market?
Yeah, sure. So probably a few different things to talk about and maybe of interest to technical listeners here. But one of the first ones, again, is just this idea of a 3D cubing algorithm. So in today's world where you have a lot of these systems that are trying to fit things into a box, they take a lot of shortcuts, again, to save processing power, to, execution speed matters at a lot of these warehouses because they need to, get products out the door and go. I won't go super deep in the details, but there is this sort of crude version of a fitting algorithm called a liquid fill, which you can almost imagine turns all of the cubic volume of products into a liquid that you pour into a cardboard box. That gets you about 70% of the way there for the most part and differs depending on how complex your SKUs are. Shoes are pretty easy to figure this problem out. Cookware with nooks and crannies and weird shapes and angles is not. And so it turns out if you go all the way to true 3D cubing and then layer on top of that some really advanced rules around things like fitting something into something else. So to again go back to our cooking pan analogy, you can flatten, put two pans into each other and seriously reduce the amount of space that someone thinks they might need to pack these into a cardboard box. So with the 3D cubing, with all these advanced geometry rules, which is something else that nobody really has on the market, plus you throw in all the processing power we can generate for very low cost with today's cloud infrastructure, you end up having a pretty meaningful difference in the way that you can go about figuring out what the cheapest and lowest cost way to pack is. There's one other element that probably is worth calling out, and it's going to be resigned a little bit more with our supply chain focused audience. But one of the things that happens in our world is if you're a shipper, you talk to FedEx or UPS or any one of the big carriers that you all might be familiar with, and you agree on some kind of negotiated rate based on distance and weight. So Beau, if I want to ship something to you, maybe it's a 5-pound item and I calculate how far it's going to go, I have a predetermined rate from a FedEx or UPS to ship that to you. Well, with the advent of all this technology and their own kind of math and computing power, these rate cards, as they're known, get very, very complex very fast. Air shipping, 2-day ground, this, that. And there's a new thing called dimensional weight. I shouldn't say new, but something called dimensional weight that they can sort of factor in to help them penalize people who ship too much air. A long way around of saying we have a way of taking these very complex rate cards into account when we do all that math, which is truly something that is unique and we have patented. And again, the example I give is sometimes it might be cheaper with the convoluted way these things work to ship 2 packages versus 1, even though that may sound more wasteful or more. Sometimes the math or cost works out that that's actually a cheaper option or a less wasteful option. So you take all these different ingredients together, much more powerful core algorithm, all these advanced 3D geometry rules we can help customers set up on their SKUs, and this idea of utilizing the actual rate cards that these companies use. Put them all into a big pot together, kind of shake it up a little bit, and you end up with, again, this kind of materially beneficial jump on today's cartonization technology that, maybe it's not a difference of saving half of their transportation costs, but a lot of these shippers spend upwards of 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million plus a year shipping things. And if you can save even 5%, 10%, not only do you save a tremendous amount of money as a company, but again, Beau, you, the end customer, don't have that terrible brand experience of seeing that Target box or whoever and, opening up and saying, wow, what a waste, and having to dump all that stuff in the trash and rip it all open. And it's just annoying. That's one of the things that attracted me to this is like, this problem is just annoying. And people who understand are probably looking at their boxes today, probably feel and understand that.
Yeah, it's definitely ripe for innovation. I think it's something that, because we've all experienced that. We all get packages nowadays delivered, especially more so than ever after COVID. Seems like I'm getting something from Amazon or wherever almost on a daily basis, and seeing the inefficiencies there, it's upsetting. And it's getting better, but there's still a ways to go. I think the 3D cubing algorithms, that's really interesting, and it just makes me think of origami. I'm just picturing like the origami techniques of folding a box a certain way to maximize the space, and also makes me think of like maybe the liquid pouring kind of analogy you mentioned. It makes me think of like you guys are manufacturing semiconductors or something super technical there. But I'm curious, are there any specific industries or use cases where this technology like really shines? Because it makes me think of, like, to name names, Apple products I receive, and how well packaged they are. You unbox the packaging just to get to the product inside, and it's so well thought out. There's no wasted space other than really what's required to provide for cushioning and padding. So do you have any other specific examples like Apple?
Yeah, and just to your last comment there on if for the people that really want to nerd out on this topic, the math problem is classically known as the bin packing problem. So if you want to go Google that, there's a big Wikipedia article about it. Again, this is sort of not a new problem, so to speak, but that's the name of the classical reference to it. If you'll see in some of the academic literature for how to best kind of combine some of the stuff. So anyway, but you raise a really good point, which is that there are companies, and I mentioned this earlier, doing really good work around this. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them. Apple's one of them. Amazon, interestingly enough, we get a lot of folks who send us Hall of Sadness pictures about Amazon, but I'll tell you, that's almost more of a numbers thing for them. They have probably anybody else in this industry have actually put a tremendous amount of effort into this for good reason, right? They save 3 cents per package. That's a big amount of money for Amazon. I think they just have such a breadth of SKUs and so many different things they offer. They're playing whack-a-mole right now, right? And that segues a little bit into your question, which is like, hey, who really can use this, and who are your real core customers? It's almost less about size or volume. It's software, it's an API, it's sort of infinitely scalable, if you will. So it almost matters a little bit less to us about how big you are or what type of warehouse operation you have. It's much more about the types of SKUs you ship. So you can imagine, again, a shoe company that ships nothing but pretty similar rectangular boxes of shoes. They can probably figure this problem out fairly well to a high degree of confidence, right? Clothing companies are another one that we always say, oftentimes, although multi-items shipments may be a different story, but you're just buying a single t-shirt or a single pair of underwear. You throw that into a poly bag. Many people are familiar with the poly bags. Great, easy, low cost, straightforward way to do this. But there's a whole world of people that ship basically things that are hard or look weird or have different dimensions. I mentioned cookware is one, like home goods is a big area for us. It's been a traditionally very difficult way to pack things into each other because of the sort of geometry and everything. Sports equipment, another good example, right? You can think about, to use an example of our 3D geometry rules, imagine if you ordered a backpack and a soccer ball, knowing how to basically be able to utilize the internal space of that backpack versus just trying to pack them next to each other, or what a more traditional system might say is the right way to do that. And really just any company that ships, again, multi-item orders that have strange sizes or strange configurations, or they have to package a lot of things together, that's typically where like our biggest bang for our buck is. It's not to say we don't have customers that do apparel and things like that. We do, but really there's usually more specialized use cases for that type of operation. And maybe the last one I'll probably mention, again, kind of interesting to the more technical audience out there, but there's automation out there that can actually create a perfect size box for every order. One of the most notable vendors in North America is a company called PackSize, as an example, and we partner with them. They found actually that by utilizing our algorithm, they actually could drive an even denser, better fit around some of these items. And so there's a lot of interesting use cases. We actually talk a little bit in some of our introduction about how this problem touches a lot of different parts of supply chain. You think about the idea of cubic utilization as it relates to storage, inventory, robotic automation, and it turns out getting better cubic space utilization in a lot of different places saves everybody a lot of money and waste. And one of our favorite customer case studies is we did a lot of work with a spaceship, actually. One of the Falcon flights that took off in a company called Axiom Space is one of our public case studies. We helped them with some pretty advanced packing requirements for their cargo hold, because that matters a lot. And even saving an extra 2 to 3% of filler space on those flights can be a meaningful amount of waste and money. So, we have some big dreams, like every startup does, about how we kind of take this technology beyond just today's use case, and we got a long way to go. But for the most part, I guess if I could leave everybody with some thought here, it's that thinking about this idea of cubic utilization, of just getting better at packing things or planning things, can actually have a tremendous ripple effect across a lot of different parts of a fulfillment operation.
Yeah, that's the example you mentioned with Axiom Space is almost the quintessential example because of just how important it is to maximize space. I mean, literally, you're so constrained by what the payload can provide, right? That's really interesting, though. I think I'll definitely have a newfound appreciation for the various packages I receive from after listening to this. I want to continue. I appreciate all the technical talk here because I think that's really interesting, and you cover it and describe it in such a way that people like myself who aren't as familiar with all the shipping intricacies here can digest pretty easily. Can you kind of elaborate on some more of the tools that Paccurate offers for making all these different efficiency gains and shipping improvements possible?
Yeah, sure. So, we say we have a platform. What does that mean? It's a number of different tools. So we have two primary ones that are kind of commercially available today, and a third that we're about to release, which I'll talk a little bit about here. But the first, which is kind of our core technology, is what we call the Pack API. So that's a live API that fulfillment centers would connect their, usually what's known as a WMS, a warehouse management system, some system of record, to that API, and literally at a pack station or as these items are getting picked, they send us a message saying, here's the 4 items and all their dimensions. Here's all the different available box sizes. Tell us what the best box to pick is. We send that right back. All of this happens in milliseconds. On and on we go. That's kind of what we call our execution product. We accidentally developed the second product by trying to show customers what the ROI of the first product would be, and we call it Pack Simulate. And it's actually a simulation platform where it's not live, it's not integrated per se, but you can take a year of historical data. And what we quickly discovered was that while a lot of people do focus today on like how to fit inside the existing boxes, it turns out there's a lot of people who have no idea if call it 8 box sizes they stock today are the right box sizes, right? How do you actually figure out like what box sizes do? Turns out it's actually a very complicated math problem. So we sort of discovered that we have the simulation tool. You can upload, again, 6 months of data, a year's worth of data, whatever. It will crunch through millions and millions of different iterations of cartonization in different size boxes to eventually give you a set of cartons or a carton suite that you can stock that should sort of net lower your overall cost. So we kind of talk about it as like the first product is execution, the live packing. Here's a box to pick. Here's a box to pick. The second one is more about planning and saying, hey, if we change this, if we bought this company and added their SKUs in, if we, hey, we're running a peak sale, or we're going to try and change up some of the economics of how we incentivize people to drive up more items per order. What does that do to our shipping cartons? And does that mean we have to rethink? Turns out there's a lot of money to be saved and waste to be reduced through that application as well. So a lot of our core customers actually do use both. They do the live packing with our tool, but every quarter or so, they run this very complex analysis tool and basically figure out, hey, do we need to make adjustments to the box sizes? Again, planning before a merger or acquisition or bringing more SKUs in, things like that. Lastly, we're about to release a tool, which will kind of be the third leg in the stool called Pack Health, probably available the next month or so. But one of the most common questions we get is actually people asking about analytics and questions like, hey, what is my fill rate and how good is my operation? Interestingly enough, there has been a new movement around the world. The EU Parliament just passed a law as recently as I think it was 3 or 4 months ago, basically limiting the amount of empty space that can be in some of these packages, called an empty space ratio. New Jersey, oddly enough, New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, followed suit and also passed a law recently saying basically that there's going to be, I think it goes into effect in 2026 or 2027, limitations and penalties to shipping too much air. And part of this is sort of a waste initiative. Part of this is just things like reusable packaging. But there's slowly been a movement by people saying, hey, we need to start regulating or penalizing some of this waste that's happening because of all of the downstream impacts that we don't have to go into today. So this Pack Health product, we believe, we hope, will eventually be a way for people to prove their compliance or certification to some of these regulations. Who knows what happens with these, right? This is years off and there's a lot of complex and there's caveats and carve outs to all this stuff. So being realistic, but for folks that are interested in staying within regulatory compliance, or if we see more of an adoption of this in the States, we believe this third tool will help them track that, prove that, and also ensure that they're never kind of slipping underneath that fill rate should their business start to change.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never knew, I didn't know that the EU had regulations around this, but it makes sense because that is such a, there's the shipping industry plays such a role on the environment. And so that's really interesting. It makes me just go down a rabbit hole of different areas of where improvements can be made. One thing that I didn't mention or didn't hear you mention was artificial intelligence. And of course, this is something that we love bringing up in these podcasts, but is this an area that Paccurate's utilizing? And if so, have you adapted to include it, as well as maybe advanced analytics? How have you incorporated this into your shipping solutions?
Yeah, fair question to ask, Beau. And I'll say there's maybe what we might call narrow AI being utilized today in our tool, but maybe it would be even a little bit of a stretch to call that that. A lot of it is just really good, pure, raw math or better algorithmic programming. That being said, we have some plans along with our analytics tool to really start to utilize things like AI to better, let me give you an example, right? To better start to understand sort of more holistically, like taking in all the data points where improvements could be made. Perfect example. So let's say you're a shipper, you're shipping all these items, things are fine, whatever. Your boss comes to you and says, hey, we got to start reducing costs for one of the million reasons people need to do that. Let's say you feel pretty well about your overall operation. You're like, how do I, our packages are being filled well. We're using the Paccurate algorithm. Everything seems to be working fine. Well, maybe you can take a further step back than just the packages, just the package size and say, how about the items that we stock? What if there's a particular item that's always causing us to sort of have to shift up to the next size box? Well, gee, do we want to stock that? If it's costing us an extra $2 in shipping for every order, and we only make $2 on this item, what are we doing, right? And so there's all these really interesting applications, again, the wardrobe in Narnia, where we think that things like large language models or any of the new kind of AI tools can help. one of the things that prevents people from utilizing our tool most effectively is just accurate dimensions. Many people don't have 100% accurate dimensions of the items that they stock, right? Is there a world where something like a large language model could look at images of these items, begin to make judgment calls, maybe not get super precise about it, but oftentimes some of the problems we catch or see are people who uh, have a pen in their system that says it's 30 inches long. Of course, the pen's not 30 inches long, but that's just one example of some ways that we think AI can begin to help sort of take a little more holistic look at some of these problems and provide value.
Yeah, well, speaking of the utilization, so you can utilize AI, you can utilize things like cloud computing or even like the blockchain, but all of that would be for nothing if your clients can't tap into it. So what support and resources does Paccurate offer to its clients to ensure that they effectively utilize this platform?
Yeah, so good question. One of the things that I would say differentiates us a little bit from maybe other solutions out there in the market or the existing ones. This is what we do. This is what we love. We have a dedicated, even like a customer success team, we call it, who live and breathe cartonization. Not to use the old analogy one more time, but wardrobe in Narnia, I'll just say there's a big rabbit hole you can start to go down when you start to really look at the math of all of this and what does it mean to try to apply some of these 3D geometry rules. And you think about scenarios where one of our big shippers, it's a company called Daily Harvest, they're a public case study of ours, but they ship a lot of sort of containers, and they had this example where there were products that you could have sort of inverted, think of two triangles inverted together. And so the math and the complexity of how to best fit a bunch of stuff together into a box gets really complex really fast. We are experts in it. One of the sort of value adds our company offers is sort of a premium service in this part of the market is us helping you understand, one, what are some of the best practices as it relates to cartonization? Two, what are some of the gaps today that you may have? Maybe it's dimensions, maybe it's the way that you're measuring some of your items. And three, we have a network of partners that, again, all kind of live and breathe this stuff. One of our consulting partners, for example, can even go in and do dimensioning. They'll actually take a bunch of people and go in and rescan the whole warehouse and reset all your dimensions and things like that. So a long way around of answering your question, Beau, which is there's a lot beyond just the technology we offer. It's why we decided to turn this into sort of a venture-backed company. And we've had really, really positive responses from most of our customers as sort of us being on loan to them for our expertise and not being able to drive further operational efficiencies and save money and reduce waste.
That's great. That's a great answer. Now, I have got one more question for you, Greg, and that is where can people learn more about Paccurate and how can they get in touch with you and your team?
Yeah, always come to Paccurate.io. That's our website out there, and hopefully we can include a link in the maybe in the episode notes or something somewhere. But we got a real friendly contact us page. We're a fairly technical team. I guess I'd say for the audience, no hard sell here, and I say that as sort of the head of the overall sales and solutions team here. But really, what we can do is, if you have data, we can take it, we can run it through our own algorithm, we can give a very black and white answer back to say, hey, you packed it into this size box. We would have packed into this size box. Is there a savings there? Yes or no? Multiply that through your overall shipping volume. That's it. It's as simple as that. And we can really provide a pretty granular review of your current shipper operation and say, does it make sense to invest in this or not? That's kind of the approach we've taken, and it's yielded us a lot of really favorable, positive customer relationships.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the time and just getting into the nitty gritty technical details. I think there's a lot of us are going to get a lot out of this, and I'm going to go on just a rabbit hole of Googling different cartonization terms, the bin packing problem. This is really interesting, and I hope listeners, you got something out of this. So that's Greg Walls, VP of Revenue for Paccurate. Thank you again so much for sitting down and talking to us.
Thank you for having me, Beau, and thank you for the listeners for the time today. Have a great day.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening to the SourceForge podcast. I'm your host, Beau Hamilton. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all of our upcoming B2B software related podcasts. I'll talk to you in the next one.